If, like me, you have seen many hundreds of underwater shots in the Caribbean or the Pacific, or beautiful islands like Bali or Tahiti or whatever, that's fabulous. But I bet you've never seen underneath a Canadian lake. So that's what I intend to do today. I'm going to show you what it's like under the water of a Canadian lake. And I'm also going to be talking about something that we might think about as depth psychology. Depth psychology is below the surface of consciousness, and that's where a lot of stuff happens. So if you have any kinds of problems with panic, anxiety, depression or stress, there are processes below the surface in the depths that are causing the problems. You're experiencing them in consciousness, of course, because that's how it works. But we need to tackle the processes below awareness if we're going to get any mileage, if we're going to get any change, if you're going to be free of these problems. So stay tuned. I'm going to show you what it's like under this lake. But not here. I want to go somewhere a little bit more interesting, and then we're going to have a talk about what's happening below the surface in your brain. So, an action-packed day, and I'm just back from New York City, so actually it's going to be lovely to get into the water as opposed to being in a cityscape. I'm going to be in a waterscape. Fabulous. I can't tell you the number of times I've put the boat in the water, I've forgotten to put the plug in and had to pull the boat out of the water again. Going over to a nice area that I like, quite scenic, and I've dug out an old wetsuit, an old mask, fins and a snorkel, and it's pretty old stuff, but I think it'll just give me a little bit of protection. The water's not that cold, but if you want to be in for 10 or 15 minutes then it gets a bit chilly. And the other thing of course is you can get scratched up by the rocks if you're sort of bouncing around and trying to look at stuff. So, mask, fins, snorkel, etc. Where we are. It's a lovely spot, and there are actually some people on that island over there. It's a great place for canoeists and other people who've got a boat and come out, and it's just lonely little islands in the middle of nowhere. So I'm just going to find a spot over on this little island here. I'm going to drop an anchor and then put my wetsuit on and go and have a little bit of a snorkel and do a bit of underwater photography. I think it'll be very scenic. The other thing is I won't be able to get back on the boat, so I better make sure that I can pull the boat into shore when the time comes. Now the wind's blowing in a particular direction, so I better just get the anchor ready. Engine's just flooded and conked out, and now I'm drifting down this passage. Which is kind of okay. I'd like to be a bit closer into the land, however. But eventually I will hit some rocks. Very gently, so I'll be okay. The engine will be okay again once it's dried itself out. I might think about dropping the anchor. Let's see if it catches, and then I can turn the boat. Better pick the engine up as well. So this is the area I want to be in. I think it'll be really interesting for snorkeling. Okay, so let's see if the anchor takes. This is not a bad spot actually. Well, I will have to lift the anchor and take the boat back over to the shore here so I can get back on board. No way I can get back on this boat. The freeboard's too high. I hope this is not too small for me. Turns out it's too small. Oh well. This might be a brief dive. The water actually is a lot warmer than I thought it would be. Quite shallow. So here we are. Now I've tied a rope from the boat, and I tied on this tree stump, I think, over here, just so that I can bring the boat into me when I'm finished with it. It's gorgeous here. Hard to think that it'll be frozen in a couple of months. Well, maybe by December. Frozen solid. You could walk on it, drive a car on it if you wanted to. In fact, islands like this one over here, it only has vehicular access, or really access if you want to get anything big, like a refrigerator or anything like that. You can only bring it out in the winter when you can drive a truck on the ice. It's a harsh environment, but you know, it's nice. And there are no, you know, hardly any snakes, and the only bugs that bother me particularly are wasps and mosquitoes, but that's okay. Many years ago, when I was young, I used to watch a show called Sea Hunt with Lloyd Bridges. Now, many of you will not know this, but it was a fabulous show because it was a scuba diver. And I think it was in 1963. And I was just fascinated with the underwater. And ever since then, I have been fascinated with underwater. That's why I'm always keen to see what's under the surface. And perhaps that's why I was attracted to being a psychologist, because I could see what was under the surface. Or I could investigate it, you know. And I like to think about psychologists and therapists as being a bit like detectives, or I describe it like Sherlock Holmes, where, you know, you're trying to figure out what's going on below the surface. Now, that's typically called depth psychology, because we could draw a line. You see, the surface of the water here, the surface of this water is the boundary between the air and the water. And it's like that with your consciousness, in a sense. Below the consciousness, below the water, and above consciousness, sort of in your awareness. And all psychological problems start below the surface. You know, the old story about like an iceberg, 7/10 of it or 7/8 of it's below the surface. And just a little bit on the surface is what you can see. Well, it's even worse than that with consciousness. You can see you have very little access to your experience of consciousness, because it mostly happens below the surface. So, many years after Sea Hunt, I became a professional diver, and I dived for many years in the North Sea, oil rigs and other kinds of installations. It's always interesting, you know, you survey the surface and you think, well, what's underneath? And it's amazing what you can find. It's, you know, I'm always surprised at what you can see. Anyway, if you want to have good mental health, you've got to recognize that there is a lot of stuff going on below the surface. And that stuff that's below the surface is important, and we don't necessarily know what it is, but we do know that there are many processes which are common between people, and these processes are always acting, really. And we can say that because things like depression and anxiety have well-defined commonalities. So with depression, for instance, I could say without any shadow of a doubt that if you're depressed, you're underestimating yourself. You're underestimating your strengths and resources, and you're overestimating your faults and failings. So you're doing two things. You're underestimating how good you are, and you're overestimating how bad you are. And that is always going to cause you a problem, and that's like one of the key characteristics of depression. Low self-esteem, feelings of worthlessness, feelings of low control, feelings of helplessness, feelings of hopelessness, like there's nothing I can do. And one of the fathers of cognitive behavior therapy, Aaron Beck, said that depression is characterized by the cognitive triad, which is negative beliefs about the self, the world, and the future. And that's fair enough. So we know that those processes are going on below the surface. We also know that they're distorted because when you're not depressed, you don't have those problems, or not to the same degree. The thing about depression is when these problems like magnify until you can't overcome them, or they just overwhelm you. And so we know that processes going on, I call them neuroprograms and processes, going on below the surface are an underestimation of self and an overestimation of faults and failings, perceived faults and failings. A lot of them are not even real faults and failings, just perceptions. So, if we want to eradicate depression, we have to say, okay, my experience is just a fraction of what actually is going on. My experience is you know, just a minuscule amount of what's going on. Like 1 pixel on the screen of your computer, that's your consciousness. All the rest of the megapixels, they're what's going on below the surface. You need to do something about that. What can we do? Okay, well, we can say, okay, I know that this is happening, therefore I can proactively calibrate myself to what I know to be true. So if you're depressed, you're underestimating yourself. What is actually true? What can I say with hand on heart is true? Well, I'm good at this. I'm good at driving. People like me. I'm good at relationships. I'm interested in this. I'm creative at this. There are many things that you can say about yourself which are true, and you can say, okay, these things I know to be true. So if below the surface I'm underestimating myself, then above the surface I need to accurately catch hold of the things I'm good at, catch hold of the things that I'm worthy about, because that's in essence modifying your low self-esteem. Now, if you're anxious, we definitely know that there are some processes going on below the surface, and one of those processes is, and I talk about this a lot, is that your brain is overestimating the sense of threat that you have. If you wake up anxious, or if you experience anxiety in the modern world, you are definitely the victim of your brain overestimating threat. How do we know that? Well, because you're not actually under any threat. We can say that you are not under any threat. I mean, where is the threat in your external reality? This attractive spot is external reality. Where is the threat in your external reality that warrants you feeling fearful? Because the emotion at the base of anxiety is fear. Do you need to feel fearful? Well, of course you don't. So my kind of powerful solution to anxiety, not a complete solution, of course, but one of my solutions is this. Below the surface, we recalibrate our brain to recognize that we are safer than we feel we are. So that your brain goes, well, okay, hang on. I'm making you feel fearful because the brain is thinking, it's assuming, it's like giving you the experience of threat. But I am not threatened. Therefore, I am safer than I feel I am. And we practice that until it becomes something that your brain can kind of go, yeah, okay, you're not threatened. I appreciate that. And it stops giving you the experience of anxiety. So, below the surface, there's a lot of stuff going on. Above the surface, we can do something about it. And we always have to use the power of practice. And as we use the power of practice, what happens is that it filters down below the surface. So, for instance, if I take this stuff here, and I just throw it onto the surface of the water, that will eventually sink in. And that's the power of practice. As you practice what's true and valid in external reality, as you practice it consciously, it filters down into your unconscious, into the depths. It goes below the surface between consciousness and unconsciousness. You'll say, well, how do you know that's true? I mean, how do you know? Well, because how do you learn anything? When you learn something, you are practicing it until it becomes unconscious knowledge. When we start a new skill, we are consciously incompetent. You've heard that phrase, I'm sure. But as we practice it, we become unconsciously competent because that skill has filtered down below the surface and is now lodged in our long-term memory, in our knowledge base. And that's how we know you learn. Because when you learn, you transfer conscious knowledge to unconscious knowledge. So if you want to be rid of panic, anxiety, depression, stress, we take what's true, we go, okay, this is true. We practice believing it. I know it sounds so silly. We practice believing it until it filters down into our unconscious below the surface, and then all of a sudden you no longer have the problem. Now you might still have bits of problem because depression is a multifaceted experience, anxiety is a multifaceted experience, there's lots of elements to it, right? But this is a strategic approach that you can use for all of the elements. You might have, in depression, for instance, you might have a poor social network, you might have a poor educational experience, you might have poor relationships. That's all fine, but they can all be dealt with because most of those reside in external reality. It's when the stuff is in unconsciousness, below the surface, that you're not aware of, it doesn't feel like you can do anything about it, but you have to do something about it because the alternative is to let it be what it is, and that is going to take you to depression and anxiety, and that's not what we want, right? We don't want those experiences. We want to have good mental health. And that's how you crack the code of good mental health. What's going on that's causing this problem? What do I know to be true that's the opposite of that in essence? And we practice what's true. We practice believing what's true. And that's basically the way forward. And that's how you crack the code. It's very peaceful. Now I've just got to figure out how to get back in the boat. I think the underwater photography business is a bit, yeah, I think we've done that. Been there, done that. Now I've got to figure out how to get the boat along the shore so that I can get back into it. So let's see how we go about that. Bloody metal. God only knows what. Alright, I think we are cooking with gas. Alright, made it back on board against the odds. Against the odds. If you didn't hear me, I said please like and subscribe. See you next time.